Um, the, right off the bat, I'm going to recommend, and I'm going a little out of order here, and I'll explain why as we start going through. But right off the bat, I'm going to recommend replacement of this electrical panel.
Okay.
Because of the brand that it is, and it's called FPE or Federal Pacific, and they're no longer in business because the type of design that they have, it turned out to be flawed. And it's by basically how the electricity works is there's the service and the meter base outside, and I'm a little, it's telling Pat I'm a little out of order here, so we'll get back to that in a second. But the electricity comes, off the service through the meter base, and then it comes in through these wires, and this is the part you don't touch. Comes in through these wires here and energizes that bus bar or those pieces of aluminum there. And then the breakers snap on to that bus bar, and then the electricity travels out through the branch circuits of the wires that way. And the analogy is with electricity, you need to have a nice firm connection, because if it's loose, it arcs, electricity arcs, and that's how fires can happen. So you want a nice firm connection. These bus bars were found to be flawed because they stab lock into the bus bar, and it makes for a loose connection.
Okay.
Now, so just because an FPE is like, I make it analogous to a Pinto. If they're just hit just right, they create problems. These, they loosen just right, they can create fires. Okay. And so just because of the brand name, I always recommend replacement. And talk to your agent about this. These were really common FPEs and another brand, Zinskos, from the 50s up until the late 70s. And so it's not uncommon, and it generally, agent, it turns out that it's the seller that does it, or so talk to your agent about that. But these are common items that do come up in negotiations.
Okay.
How this electrical panel works is it's called a split bus design. These were really common in the 70s, up until the 70s. So I was showing you how the electricity comes in through these wires here, and it essentially it's two types of panel. This would be the main, and then you have your range and water heater, and probably have some space heaters down here. So this is all set up for the 240. And then this breaker here, which I tripped when I took the panel off, this energizes all the lights and switches, or the the lower bus down here. And do you see how it's nice shiny aluminum, say for example there, and do you see how it's kind of browned or tainted up above?
Yes.
That could be from sparking of the sub breaker, the breakers here for the sub panel down below.
Okay.
So this panel especially is one of concern, and it needs to be replaced.
Okay.
And then I'm going to come back to this because there's another thing that I'm concerned with. Now, do you see electrical wiring? The solid core wires are copper, and sometimes you can have braided aluminum, and oftentimes the service is braided aluminum. And braided is fine, but when the branch circuits here are solid aluminum, that's a problem. And solid aluminum wiring was used during the Vietnam War era, because copper natural resources became a little bit more expensive during wartime, and so they experimented with using solid aluminum. The problem with aluminum, though, is as it heats up, it shrinks and expands. Same thing happens, the wires get loose and can create an arc or a spark. Okay. Now, in 1952 home, I wouldn't necessarily expect to find solid core aluminum. Because we're not within that era. And the the solid copper of the 50s can have a coating to it, like this range hood up here, which can sometimes make it look as though it's the solid aluminum when it's actually just a coated copper. But this panel could have been put in during that Vietnam War, and some new circuits have been added. All of the house in 1950s would not have had this many circuits. So as I'm going through the house, I'll try and get more of a sense. But it appears as though some circuits were added some point between the original house and today, and based on the type of panel this is, it could coincide with that Vietnam War era. So it's difficult sometimes to tell if those branch circuits are aluminum at the actual breaker connection. It's easier to actually see them on the bus bar connection, and here's where I'm seeing some of the, what it very well might be the aluminum. So when the panel's traded out, I'm also going to write for that electrician to check for any solid core aluminum wiring. And if that's the case, it's also recommended that that be either totally replaced or have different types of connections put to them. With with solid core copper, it's okay to take the wire and basically fish hook it, wrap it around that screw, and you put the U, so here's the screw, you put the U over the screw underneath the screw tab, and you just tighten the screw down, and that's a secure enough connection. With solid aluminum, that gets loose as the aluminum shrinks and expands, and so you actually have to, with a special crimp tool, fuse that aluminum to the connections, and it's expensive. It's $50 a connection, and by connection I mean outlet would be one connection, the light fixture would be another connection, everywhere that the wires are checked. So I'm going to try to get a sense of if there's any aluminum and how much as we go through the house here. But that's something that's going to come up as a concern. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions at that point?
No.
Okay. So far I'm seeing an electrical theme here. And let's go outside and we'll get started there. We're going to talk about the electrical service.
Sure.